A late-night call from Inspector Cramer drags Nero Wolfe and Archie into a deadly tangle of political money, murdered power brokers, and a traitor hiding inside the NYPD itself. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe, the night Cramer, lost his temper. The phone rang with the kind of jittery edge that suggested somebody out there thought the world would shatter if I didn't pick up on the first ring. I'd just settled on the sofa with a ginger ale, my nerves felt entitled to it, when the thing jangled again. If it had grown legs, it would have marched over and slapped me. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, which meant that unless the house was on fire, I was the one stuck with the job. So I lifted the receiver and gave the standard Nero Wolfe's residence, Archie Goodwin speaking, with exactly the amount of charm required to keep us in business. What I heard on the other end was not charm. Cramer's voice had the texture of sandpaper and the warmth of a refrigerator door. He didn't yell, which was how I knew something was seriously wrong. Instead, he clipped out, "Goodwin, I need to see Wolfe now." That now wasn't a suggestion. It practically left scratch marks on my eardrum. I asked the natural question, "Are you sure you dialed the right number, Inspector? You're calling for help instead of sending a squad to drag us downtown?" But I didn't get the usual blast of backdraft. Just a heavy exhale and the faint crunch of him abusing a cigar with his teeth. The line went dead. I hung up and stared at the receiver long enough to wonder if someone had swapped Cramer with a well-trained replica. When Wolfe came down at 11:03 by the clock, orchid hours over, he spotted my expression and grunted. "Archie, if you're about to convey imbecility, postpone it." I stood, crossed the office and gave him the gist. "Inspector Cramer's coming over. He didn't curse. He didn't even accuse me of being born sideways. Something's off." Wolfe's thick brows rose like two suspicious drawbridges. "Not cursed, and yet you assume it was Cramer." "Unless some stranger smoked 3 cigars at once into the mouthpiece," I said. "Yeah." Wolfe lowered himself into the client chair with the dignity of a man settling onto a throne that owed him money. He tapped his fingertips together, contemplating the crime of being disturbed before lunch. "Very well. When he arrives, you will admit him." That was a concession. Usually Wolfe wanted 3 solid reasons before letting Cramer in, plus a signed waiver for damage to the carpet. Before I could honor the moment with a wisecrack, the bell rang. The sound of doom rarely comes politely, but this one had a tone suggesting the bearer had worn a trench into our stoop. I went to the door and opened it to find Inspector Lionel Cramer, looking like he'd wrestled with sleep, lost, and demanded a rematch. His hat was at a defeated angle, his coat rumpled, and the cigar in his hand was chewed into something that should have been buried at sea. He didn't barge in. He pushed past me, sure, but with less steam than usual, like someone had siphoned off half his temper. If Manhattan had stopped turning, I wouldn't have been surprised. When he entered the office and saw Wolfe sitting there like a Buddha sculpted out of disapproval, something flickered behind his eyes. Exhaustion, frustration, maybe even fear. That alone was new. "Wolfe," he said, and left it there. Wolfe gestured at the red leather chair. "Inspector, please." Cramer sat, but he didn't relax. "We've got a problem," he announced. "A big one." I leaned against my desk, arms folded. "Bigger than the DA wanting your badge again?" That usually got me a snort. Today it got nothing. "A man's dead," Cramer said flatly. "A prominent man, Malcolm Keating." I recognized the name immediately. Political fundraiser, society ladder climber, and a man with enough influence to make City Hall dance a jig at his luncheons. "He was found in his penthouse office 2 hours ago," Cramer added. "Shot, straight through the heart." He rubbed the bridge of his nose as though it was supposed to help. "And someone on my own team tampered with the evidence." That shook even Wolfe, though he hid it behind a small grunt. "Sabotage?" "Yes," Cramer growled. "Files moved, notes altered, a watch placed on the body that wasn't there when my men first arrived." Wolfe's eyes narrowed to slits. "You have a rogue." "Or worse," Cramer muttered. "Someone protecting a bigger fish." He reached into his pocket, produced a folded paper and passed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. A message, scrawled in block letters, had been shoved under Keating's hand at the scene. It read, "You already know who did it." That wasn't a clue. That was a taunt. "Cute," I remarked. "If the killer wants to write anonymous fan mail, maybe he should pick a different target." "Shut up, Goodwin," Cramer snapped, more out of reflex than heat. He wasn't angry at me. He wasn't even angry at Wolfe. He was angry at a situation he couldn't control. Wolfe studied him like a botanist faced with an invasive species. "Inspector, are you here to enlist my assistance?" Cramer didn't answer at once. He chewed the cigar, spit out a fragment of wrapper, and finally muttered, "Yes." The word appeared to pain him physically. "Someone in my department is dirty. Someone close enough to compromise the investigation." His voice cracked just enough to betray the weight on him. "I need your brain on this, Wolfe." That was the first honest appeal I'd ever heard from him. Wolfe inhaled slowly, deeply, and let it out like he was extinguishing a candle. Then he turned those heavy-lidded eyes on me. "Archie, cease smirking. It is unbecoming." "I wasn't smirking," I said, though I was doing an excellent job of it. He ignored me and addressed Cramer. "Your admission is extraordinary. Therefore I must ask, why me? Why now?" Cramer's fingers tightened on the cigar. "Because someone left that message for me. For me. They want me to feel cornered. If I don't get ahead of this, they'll use the press to bury me." That explained the desperation. A scandal like this could gut the NYPD and mount Cramer's head on a bureaucratic pike. "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "The press is a sewer. You should not fear its effluvia." "Easy for you to say," Cramer shot back. "You don't have commissioners breathing down your neck." Wolfe didn't bother replying. He shifted his bulk in the chair and folded his hands. "Very well, Inspector. I will consider it." "Consider?" Cramer's eyebrows jumped. "I came here." Yes, Wolfe said irritably, "to secure my services. But I am not a fire brigade to be summoned at the first whiff of smoke." His tone softened. Barely. "Repeat your request. Without agitation. Without bluster." Cramer stared, and for 1 second I thought he might explode. Then he surprised all three of us. He took a long, shuddering breath, flicked ash into his palm, and said quietly, "Nero Wolfe, please help me." Silence blanketed the room. Even the radiator paused to listen. Wolfe nodded once. Accepted. He reached for the bell cord and gave it a firm tug. Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate as always. "Yes, sir?" "Beer for me, ginger ale for Mr. Goodwin, and something suitable for Inspector Cramer." "Coffee," Cramer muttered, rubbing his forehead. "Black." Fritz vanished like a courteous phantom. Wolfe leaned back and addressed him with surprising gentleness. "Inspector, you have my word. We will unmask this perfidious meddler, but you must allow me to proceed in my fashion." "I don't care how you do it," Cramer said. "Just do it fast." Before Wolfe could respond, the inspector's hand twitched toward his breast pocket. He pulled out a thin folder and slid it across the desk. Photos, early notes, witness list. Unaltered. The only set I trust. I opened the folder and skimmed. Keating was sprawled across his desk, the skyline glittering behind him like Manhattan was holding a candlelight vigil. His expression was frozen surprise. I flipped to the second page. No weapon in sight. Third page, the note. Fourth, signs of forced entry in a private filing cabinet. Something wasn't right. "Inspector," I said, "what time did your men get there?" 1:42 a.m. "And you're sure this cabinet was forced?" He nodded. "Positive." Then someone was looking for something that wasn't there. That earned me a sharp side-eye from Wolfe. His way of saying I was onto something, but not to get cocky. Fritz returned with beverages precisely when the air felt thick enough to slice. Wolfe sipped his beer with the solemnity of a priest at communion. Cramer gulped his coffee like a man trying to drown dread. I got my ginger ale and took a thoughtful swig. It occurred to me that we were being herded, not by Cramer, but by the killer. Someone wanted this exact chain of events. A compromised case, a rattled inspector Wolfe recruited at the 11th hour, which meant someone was playing a long game. Wolfe must have sensed it too. His eyelids lowered further, the look he gets when information is lining up like birds on a wire. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow you will go to the penthouse, ascertain what remains of value." "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said tartly, "that you will observe, deduce, and refrain from gallivanting." "I make no promises," I said. He snorted, which for Wolfe is affection. Cramer finished his coffee and stood slowly. "Wolfe, this doesn't leave the room." Wolfe inclined his head. "Of course. And if you find something, anything, you tell me first." "Naturally." They exchanged a look that wasn't friendly but wasn't hostile either, the look of two men who'd stopped pretending to dislike each other for sport. Cramer set the empty cup on my desk, wiped his hand across his face and moved toward the door. "All right, Wolfe," he muttered. "I'll wait for your report." That was respect in Cramer language. As he left, I called after him, "Inspector, if you find any more polite corpses, send them our way." He didn't growl. He just lifted a hand in tired acknowledgement and disappeared into the night. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe exhaled. "Archie." "Yes?" "Lock up, then bring me the evidence folder." I nodded, closed the office door and flicked the lock. When I turned back, Wolfe had already arranged himself like a mountain preparing for weather. "We begin," he said, and that was the hook, quiet, heavy and final. The night, from that moment, belonged to us. By the time I stepped out of the cab on East 62nd, the morning light had that particular Manhattan shine that makes even a murder scene look as if it's posing for a civic brochure. Keating's building rose like a cashmere-wrapped fist, quiet, expensive, and absolutely certain it deserved better company than the police barricade stretched across its front walk. I flashed my license at the uniform guarding the door, got a grunt that could have meant anything from go in to go to hell, and took the elevator up to the penthouse. At floor 27, the doors slid open with the reluctance of an aging dowager, revealing Pearly Stebbins planted in the hallway like a badly pruned oak. His bulldog jaw worked a piece of gum as if it had personally offended him. "Goodwin," he said, widening his stance as if I might try to flee. "You're late." "Pearly," I greeted him. "Nice to see you taking in the morning air. I'd say you brighten the landscape, but I'm not that good a liar before breakfast." He grunted. "Half the mayor's office has been in there already, trying to be useful." The way he said useful made it sound like a felony. "Walk carefully. We're already lucky the evidence hasn't packed up and left the country." We stepped into the penthouse, and I immediately understood his mood. If money could scream, the place would have been howling. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed a velvet dark sweep of Manhattan's skyline, and the rugs were thick enough to smother a man. Shame they hadn't done the job in time to save Malcolm Keating. His desk, a broad slab of polished walnut, still bore the chalk outline where he'd collapsed. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder under a heavier layer of last night's bourbon. If ambition had a scent, this room bottled it. A few aides in expensive suits hovered like anxious sparrows, trying to appear professionally devastated. "What have we got?" I asked. Pearly rubbed his nose with a thick finger. "Corpse was here when my boys arrived at 1:42. Single shot. No gun on the scene." He jerked his chin toward the desk. "Wristwatch missing. Cufflinks don't match." I leaned over. "Sure enough, 1 gold, 1 silver. "A man this rich could afford symmetry," I said. "Unless he got dressed in the dark or someone else undressed him after he was cold." Pearly muttered something unprintable. I moved to the window. From there, the city sprawled like a map of motives, towers full of people who wanted something, and a few who'd kill to get it. Political fundraisers aren't shy about enemies. They breed them like orchids. Wolfe would have appreciated the metaphor, though he'd have phrased it like a lecture. A chair near the wet bar lay overturned, one leg snapped. I crouched beside it. "Scuffle?" "Maybe," Pearly said. "Or maybe one of the mayor's geniuses bumped it after stepping on the corpse's shoelace. Hard to tell." "The mayor employs only the finest buffoons," I said. One aide, a young fellow with a tie loosened just enough to imply distress, overheard us and blanched. I gave him a comforting nod. "Relax. If you'd murdered him, you'd look less nervous." He squeaked and retreated. I followed a faint glint on the carpet, lipstick smeared along the telephone base, classy shade, deeper red than the mayor's polling numbers. "Lady visitor?" Pearly shrugged. Could be one of the aides' wives. Hell if I know. They're crawling all over each other in this racket." That was our first red herring of the day, Pearly suggesting the lipstick might be nothing. Lipstick on the phone of a man known for late-night persuasion sessions with donors was never nothing. I moved behind the desk. A drawer had been forced, badly. Whoever pried it open lacked finesse or time. Maybe both. "This new?" I asked. "We think so, but," Pearly rolled his cigar between his fingers, "wasn't noticed until 20 minutes ago." "Because the tourist parade tromped all over the room," I finished for him. "Good work, Pearly. At this rate the killer will file a complaint about police interference." He growled. "Drop dead, Goodwin. Not today, I said. I have lunch plans. Inside the drawer was a ledger, thick, leather-bound, and full of more secrets than a bishop's diary. Donations listed in neat columns, names, dates, some so large they could have bought the mayor himself a conscience. But one page had been torn out. I lifted the book carefully, no original evidence vanishing on my watch, and noticed a tiny scrap stuck beneath the blotter. I loosened it with a pencil tip. 2 initials, VD. That was going to matter. It had that special sparkle clues get when they want to ruin your afternoon. One of the aides, a slim woman in spectacles with sharp, measuring eyes, drifted close. "Excuse me," she said, voice clipped like she'd trained it to cut glass. "I'm Mr. Keating's personal assistant, Linda Shaw. I'd appreciate it if you didn't handle his private records unnecessarily." I smiled. "Miss Shaw, if you can point me to the necessary handling, I'll do that instead." She stiffened but didn't retreat. Mr. Keating valued his confidentiality. "So do I said, "especially when people die for it." Her eyes flickered. Fear, or guilt, or the general disgust most administrative professionals reserve for detectives. "I'll be available if you have questions," she said, and glided off to admonish another aide who was refilling his coffee too close to police chalk. Pearlie came beside me. "She's been cool as ice since we got here. Says she left at 9. Says he had no appointments after." "And you believe her?" Pearlie snorted. "I don't believe anybody who irons their shoes." I didn't know what that meant, but I agreed anyway. I moved to the wet bar, 2 glasses, one smudged heavily with fingerprints, the other clean. "He drink alone?" "Probably not," Pearlie said. There was another glass on the table when the mayor's people got here, but someone moved it, or broke it, or swallowed it whole. Hard to tell with this crowd. Another red herring, but you never know. I took a few more laps around the room, filing details in the mental cabinet labelled "Wolfe will ask." The scent of expensive cologne lingered near the hall, a spicy note unfamiliar to me. I bent down, but the carpet had been trampled too thoroughly to preserve anything useful. I'd need Wolfe's nose for that, and he wasn't leaving the brownstone even if Keating rose from the dead and offered him a ride. A uniform approached Pearlie with a whispered update. Ballistics hadn't found a casing yet, and the DA's office was already asking for progress. Pearlie's eyebrows nearly fused into his hairline. "Progress? With this circus?" He shot me a look like I was responsible. "Goodwin, tell Wolfe I'm not cleaning this up alone." "If you need a janitor," I said, "call the building superintendent." "I'm gonna call," he began, but his pocket buzzed. He fished out his notepad instead, glaring as if it were to blame. That was my cue. I stepped aside, dialed the brownstone, and Wolfe answered on the second ring, which meant he had been expecting me or lunch was delayed. "Report," he commanded. I gave him the layout in clean detail, the mismatched cufflinks, the lipstick smear, the ledger with the missing page, the initials VD, the forced drawer, the overturned chair. Wolfe grunted at intervals, which for him counts as applause. When I finished, he said, "Archie, come home." "You don't want me to dig deeper? I'm just getting warmed up." "Come home," he repeated, voice edged with something sharper than annoyance. "You have seen enough to confirm my suspicion." "Which is?" "You will hear it when I choose to speak it." That was Wolfe for hurry up. I pocketed my notes, gave Pearlie a jaunty salute, and headed for the elevator. "Where are you going?" he barked. "Wolfe calls," I said. "City trembles." "Yeah," Pearlie muttered, "and I get the bill." As the doors slid shut, the penthouse vanished behind me, but the scent of money, danger, and political rot clung to my coat all the way down. Whatever Wolfe suspected, it wasn't small, and it wasn't friendly. Tomorrow, I'd wish it were. If there's one thing that will ruin a man's return home faster than a broken elevator or an unpaid gas bill, it's finding Nero Wolfe entertaining a guest he didn't warn you about. When I stepped into the office that morning, shrugging off my coat after the delightful carnival that was Keating's penthouse, I stopped short. Wolfe's bulk was planted behind his desk, fingers steepled, mouth set to its usual expression of having been wronged by civilization. Across from him sat a woman in a fur coat so lavish it could have filed a tax return. She turned her head slightly, giving me the kind of cool, practiced smile actresses use when they expect applause for breathing. "Archie," Wolfe said dryly, "you are late." "I ran out of red carpets," I said. "And cabs." The woman rose a fraction, just enough for me to appreciate the tailoring of her dress and the precision of her posture. The perfume reached me next. Something expensive, theatrical, and faintly dangerous. If trouble wore perfume, it would smell exactly like Veronica Dale. "You must be Mr. Goodwin," she said, voice like a well-trained cello. "That's me," I said, "and you must be—" "Miss Veronica Dale," Wolfe supplied, his tone implying I should refrain from any comment on her cinematic fame or personal life. She insists she has come merely to correct the record. "Yes," she said quickly, smoothing her glove, "before Inspector Cramer misconstrues my presence at Mr. Keating's dinner last night. I have no intention of being dragged into scandal." "That makes two of us," I said, "but fate keeps throwing them at my head." Her smile tightened. Wolfe cleared his throat. "Miss Dale contends that Mr. Keating invited her to a discreet political dinner. Fundraising," she corrected. "With select associates," Wolfe continued, "and that she departed well before the hour of his demise." I moved closer. Funny thing, his penthouse still smelled like a party that hadn't decided whether it wanted guests or corpses. "That's not mine to answer," she said quickly. "Mr. Keating and I had a disagreement about optics. Politics demands a certain presentation. Malcolm wanted flash, I advised subtlety. He insisted on a grand gesture. I refused." "And left," Wolfe added. "Yes, immediately." I didn't comment, though her earrings alone suggested she didn't leave anywhere immediately. Wolfe watched her with the same focused stillness he reserved for orchids that refused to bloom on schedule. "Miss Dale, you said something curious." She blinked. "Did I?" "You mentioned Mr. Keating still wearing his silver cufflink." Her expression froze just long enough to reveal cracks in the glamour. "Did I? I assumed he always wore the set." "You said silver. Singular." She swallowed. "A slip of the tongue." "Phooey," Wolfe murmured. "A tongue may slip, but rarely at the precise angle required to expose foreknowledge." I stepped around her and dropped into my chair. "Just for the record, Miss Dale, the cufflinks weren't matching. One gold, one silver." Her breath hitched so quietly only Wolfe and I noticed. "I didn't know that," she said too quickly. "Of course not," I said. "Unless someone told you." She clutched her purse. "I'm being honest." Wolfe's brows lifted a millimeter, his equivalent of a gunshot. "The honesty of a woman who arrives unannounced at my home at an inconvenient hour, draped in artifice and anxiety, is contestable." The doorbell rang. Fritz didn't bring messages from the kitchen. He appeared in person, impeccable as always. "Inspector Cramer, sir." Wolfe muttered something in French that I won't repeat. Cramer entered with surprising calm. His coat was buttoned, his hat straight, and his cigar unlit. For him, the portrait of serenity, which meant he was a hair's breadth from implosion. His eyes swept the room and landed on Dale. "You," he said, not kindly but not explosively either. She straightened. "Inspector, I came only to clarify." "You always do," he said, sinking into the red leather chair opposite Wolfe. "Wolfe, morning." "Inspector," Wolfe replied, "you seem unnervingly placid." "I'm tired," Cramer said, "and I've already dealt with 3 reporters who think they know more about this case than my own men." I shot him a grin. "Our condolences." Cramer ignored me and turned to Dale. "I have questions." "So do we," Wolfe said, lifting a hand. "But you will refrain from harrying her, at least until I'm finished." Cramer stiffened. "Wolfe—" "Inspector," Wolfe interrupted, voice deepening. "You asked for my assistance. Allow me to conduct it." Cramer's jaw tightened, but he nodded. That alone showed how rattled he was. "Miss Dale," Wolfe resumed, "you were saying you departed early." "Yes," she said, "after our disagreement." "And you did not return?" "No." I noted she didn't mention whether she went anywhere verifiable. Cramer leaned forward. "Miss Dale, did Keating mention any particular donor causing trouble? Someone threatening him? Someone he'd want to keep off the books?" She flinched. I don't know." That was a lie. You could hear the hinge squeak. Cramer shifted, grinding the cigar between his fingers. "You know he kept detailed ledgers." Her eyes flicked to me, then Wolfe, then away. "Lots of men in politics keep ledgers, Inspector. Most don't share them." "Most don't get murdered either," I said. She shut her eyes briefly. Wolfe beckoned me closer. "Archie, a notebook." I retrieved my pad, flipped it open and raised my pencil. "Catalogue Miss Dale's statements," Wolfe instructed. "Precisely. Without embellishment." His gaze sharpened. which may challenge your tendencies. Sure, I said, but only if she starts juggling flaming batons. Piffle, Wolfe snapped. You are addled. Dale watched us with a mixture of annoyance and fascination, as if observing a strange domestic ritual between lion and handler. Wolfe resumed. Miss Dale, whom did you speak with after leaving the penthouse? No one. I raised an eyebrow. No phone calls, no visits, no midnight confessions to a friend with good lighting. Her jaw twitched. I went home. And stayed there, Cramer said. Until when? Until morning. Wolfe let the silence stretch. Dale's fingers tightened around her purse. Finally, Wolfe said, Miss Dale, someone told you the cufflinks were mismatched. No, she whispered. Someone told you about the forced draw. Her head snapped up. I never said. You knew, Wolfe said softly, about the torn page. Cramer's eyes flared. What page? I cut in. Ledger. One page torn. Found a scrap with initials VD. Cramer swore quietly. This case is a snake pit. Wolfe ignored him. Miss Dale, your knowledge surpasses your claimed involvement. You must explain. She seemed to deflate, shoulders sinking, breath trembling. Malcolm called me. Her eyes glistened, not tears, but panic. After I left, he said he'd made a mistake, that someone was trying to... She shut her mouth so sharply it was audible. Trying to what? I pressed. I can't say. Cramer rose halfway from his chair. Miss Dale. Wolfe lifted one hand, commanding silence. Inspector, Wolfe said gently. Sit. That was protectiveness. Rare, subtle, unmistakable. Cramer slowly sat. Miss Dale, Wolfe continued, I urge candor. If you withhold, you jeopardize yourself and others. She shook her head violently. I can't. Cramer exhaled through his nose. Wolfe, maybe let me... No. Wolfe's tone was steel. She is terrified, not guilty. Her head snapped toward him in surprise. Wolfe's voice softened. I am not your enemy, but whoever told you those details may be. Her lips parted. She was close to cracking. Then the phone rang. I crossed the room, lifted the receiver. Nero Wolfe's office. Goodwin. A familiar voice rasped. Goodwin. Put Wolfe on. Inspector Cramer's already here, I said. Not Cramer, the voice snapped. This is Lieutenant Grissom. We found something. I covered the receiver. Wolfe, Grissom. Wolfe extended his hand. I passed the phone. Yes, Wolfe said. Speak. A pause. Then Wolfe's brows climbed. I see. Very well. Thank you. He hung up slowly, then looked at Dale. You are in danger, he said simply. Her breath stuttered. Cramer leaned forward. Why? What did Grissom say? Wolfe ignored him for a beat too long. Cramer bristled but didn't bark. Finally, Wolfe said, Inspector, you asked me to find the rotten apple in your department. Cramer swallowed. Yeah. I can, Wolfe said, if you permit me to bruise a few. Cramer nodded. Do it. The scene ended with Wolfe pulling the bell cord sharply, summoning Fritz for coffee, a ritual beginning for what promised to be a very ugly day. If there's a particular scent that sums up the real estate moguls of Manhattan's West 40s, it's a mixture of expensive leather, expensive cologne, and the faintest whiff of legal liability. Roland Barrington's office had all three in spades, and when I stepped into it at 10:30 that morning, I felt like I'd walked straight into a skyscraper-sized resume of greed. The place looked 20 floors down on the city, like it was evaluating which block to buy next. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk big enough to land a small aircraft on, carpets that probably had lobbyists buried under them, all the expected touches for a man who thought humility was a design flaw. Barrington himself rose only halfway from his chair, as if the idea of fully standing for a man not holding a checkbook offended him. Goodwin, he said, voice flat, clipped, and meant to indicate I should make this quick. I would, I said, but you're listed under RB, and the alphabet and I have an understanding. He didn't appreciate it. Men who eat marble for breakfast rarely enjoy a wisecrack. I don't know what you're insinuating, but I had nothing to do with Keating's death. Funny, I said, strolling toward the desk. I wasn't insinuating anything yet. He bristled, and I filed that reaction under useful later. I gave the office a slow once-over. The walls were lined with framed property maps, grids of the West 40s with little red squares marking buildings Barrington had swallowed whole. One map had so many red squares it looked like a case of measles. Behind him sat a set of dark wooden shelves, stacked with volumes titled Negotiation Tactics, Urban Expansion, and one lonely copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People that looked like it had never been touched. But the real gem was the photograph on the corner of his desk. Barrington, Malcolm Keating, and Veronica Dale, all shaking hands at a gala and smiling like thieves splitting a bank deposit. 3 faces, 1 triangle, and at least 2 lies. "Nice picture," I said. Barrington's eyes followed mine. Publicity shot. Publicity for what? A charity auction. His jaw tightened. Don't try to imply anything. Who said I was implying? I'm just admiring and observing. It's my hobby. He ground his teeth loud enough to qualify as percussion. I shifted to the main attraction, a leather-bound ledger he kept half hidden under a stack of papers. Keating kept one just like this, I said, except his had a page torn out. That got him moving. Quick hands, for a man built like a stone obelisk. He snatched the ledger off the desk. "This is my copy." "Copy?" "Yes, we mirrored each other's records." He flipped it open with a motion that said he was used to revealing only what he chose. "Here, look." He shoved the book toward me. I took it, briefly, carefully, and scanned the columns. Sums that would have paid my rent for a decade. Names from all levels of Manhattan society. And then, near the back, a line item boxed in red ink. Special donation, $200,000, via intermediary. No name, no initials, just a number that lit up the page like a flare. That intermediary wouldn't happen to be a small, silver cufflink wearing political climber, would it? I asked. Barrington slammed the ledger shut. It was legal. Sure, I said, and my Aunt Bertha is the Queen of Norway. He jabbed a finger at me. Keating pressured me, hard. He wanted a favour last week, something I couldn't give. The man was digging his own grave. That's a poetic way of saying motive. He went scarlet. I didn't kill him. I circled behind him and buzzed the intercom. Miss, this is Archie Goodwin in Barrington's office. Your boss would like to donate another 200 grand. Prepare the confetti. Barrington exploded out of his chair like a man launched from a cannon. Get out. That's the reaction of a man who likes his privacy, I said, heading for the door. Or a man who's worried someone will ask where the first 200 went. Goodwin, he said, through clenched teeth, if you accuse me again— I haven't accused you yet, I said pleasantly, but I'm taking notes. I stepped into the reception area where his secretary, a thin woman with tired eyes and a blouse that deserved hazard pay, watched me with the expression of someone torn between fear and the urge to whisper classified intel. I leaned in. I won't tell him you talked, I said softly. She swallowed. 2 nights before the murder, someone broke into Mr. Keating's files. Someone meaning. A man, heavy coat, didn't turn on the lights, I only saw the silhouette. What time? After 10. Did he see you? No, I stayed hidden. I shouldn't even be saying this, I nodded. Anything else? She hesitated, licking her lips. I remember a smell. Smell? Something floral, strange, like powder, but richer. It clung to the air after he left. I knew exactly what she meant. Orchid pollen. And not the cheap stuff florists hawk to husbands who forgot an anniversary. No, this was rare, close, particular, unmistakable. The same kind Wolfe spent half his waking life fussing over. There were 2 possibilities. Someone who'd recently visited Wolfe's plant rooms, or someone planting a clue to drag Wolfe into the mud. Neither one sat right. Thank you, I said, slipping her my card. If you remember anything else, anything at all, call. I shouldn't, I echoed, is the anthem of people who end up regretting things. Call. She nodded faintly. I headed for the elevator. Behind me, Barrington's voice boomed through the door, berating some poor employee for breathing too loudly. The doors slid shut. As the car dropped, my stomach gave a lurch, not from the descent, but from the realization that someone wanted Wolfe's name near this corpse badly enough to sprinkle orchid pollen like breadcrumbs. When the cab dropped me at the brownstone, it was 12:48. Too close to lunch to expect conversation. Fritz opened the dining room doors with his usual timing, but Wolfe wasn't there. I found him in the office, lowering himself into the red leather chair with a sigh that suggested the world was already insolent enough without my return. "Well?" he asked. I closed the door behind me. "Barrington's sweating. He has a second ledger. The missing page was a $200,000 ghost donation, and someone broke into Keating's files 2 nights ago." Wolfe grunted. "And," I added, "the intruder left a scent." "What scent?" "Orchids." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Phooey." "That's what I said," I replied. "Someone's trying to tie you to the body with floral rope." Wolfe shut his eyes and massaged his temple with 2 fingers. "They're attempting to tether me to this corpse," he murmured. "Imbeciles." "When imbeciles get ambitious," I said, "they get dangerous." He opened his eyes. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Fetch Cramer." "That'll brighten his day." "Brighten his day," Wolfe repeated, "or scorch it. Either is acceptable." Right then, Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Lunch is ready, sir." Wolfe rose, reluctantly, regally. That was the ritual end of the scene, and somewhere in Manhattan someone who smelled like orchids was smiling. The rain had that slick, oily sheen Manhattan gets when it's washing sins off the pavement, and around 11 o'clock the next morning, Cramer called with a tone that shaved 10 degrees off the room. I was in the office, finishing notes Wolfe pretended not to read when the phone trilled like an alarm clock with a grudge. I answered with the usual charm. What came back wasn't charm at all. "Goodwin," Cramer said tightly. "Put Wolfe on." He didn't bark, didn't snarl, didn't even chew his cigar. That alone would have told me someone important was newly dead, even without the grim pause that followed. I passed the receiver to Wolfe, who lifted it with the air of a man accepting a complaint about the weather. "Yes, Inspector." A beat. Then Wolfe's eyelids dropped 1/2 inch. "I see. When?" Another pause. "Very well. Archie will go." He hung up, dropped the receiver like it had personally offended him, and said, "Mr. Barrington is dead." I stared. The real estate titan? The skyscraper with suspenders? He seemed too angry to die. "He collapsed in his limousine," Wolfe said, "poisoned." That cut the air. "And you're sending me?" "Yes, because Inspector Cramer," Wolfe's mouth twitched, "is worried someone is targeting his case." "Should have been worried earlier," I muttered, "before people started dropping like overpriced flies." Wolfe aimed a glower at me. "Your levity is misplaced." "I'm not being levitous," I said. "I'm being realistic." He grunted. "Go." I grabbed my coat, hat, and notebook, and 10 minutes later I was sliding into the back of a police sedan driven by Pearlie Stebbins, who looked like he'd been carved directly from frustration. "You heard?" he asked. "Barrington took the express route to the morgue," I said. "How poetic." Pearlie's grip on the steering wheel tensed. This case is turning into a sewer with legs. We rolled through rain that hit the windshield like pebbles. When we reached the morgue, a coroner with bags under his eyes big enough to pack for Europe led us to Barrington's slab. The cold, fluorescent lights gave the place all the charm of a dentist with a hangover. "Poison," the coroner said. "Fast-acting. He kept a container of stomach tablets in his inner pocket. Someone tampered with them." The container lay on a tray, half open, the tablets looking innocent and deadly in equal measure. "Only someone close would know he used these," I said. Pearlie grunted. "Yeah, which means our list is shrinking to people I don't trust as far as I can sneeze." I stepped closer to Barrington's coat, hanging neatly on a hook. In the inner pocket was a folded scrap, one I recognized immediately. The torn ledger fragment, the mate to the scrap I'd found under Keating's blotter, and the initials on the transfer line were the same. V.D. Veronica Dale, a name designed to raise blood pressure. I made a noise low in my throat. Pearlie caught it. "What?" "Barrington had half the missing page on him," I said. "You want bad news or worse news?" Pearlie scowled. "Just say it." "The initials on the line item, $200,000, weren't his. They were hers." Pearlie muttered something unprintable even by NYPD standards. "And," I added, "this makes her lie earlier a lot shinier." Pearlie jabbed a finger at me. "Don't jump. People lie when scared, especially around politicians." Then she must have been terrified. On the way out, the rain had thickened into a soup so greasy it felt like you could bottle it and sell it to mobsters. We drove back with the heater fighting a losing battle. When Pearlie dropped me at the brownstone, I stepped out into a puddle deep enough to drown a philosophy student. Inside, I dripped my way into the office. Wolfe looked up from a book like I was a disobedient dog returning from a swamp. "Archie," he said sharply, "you will ruin your lungs gallivanting in weather fit only for aquatic mammals." "That's concern," I said. "Careful, you'll get sentimental." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. But he didn't tell me to change clothes before reporting. He just waited. I laid out everything: the poison, the doctored tablets, the ledger scrap with Dale's initials, the timing. Wolfe absorbed it with a stillness that would have made a statue jealous. "So," I finished, "2 men connected to the same ledger are dead, and Veronica Dale is looking more interesting by the minute." "No," Wolfe said calmly. "Not more interesting, more threatened." That made me blink. "She's a suspect." "She is," Wolfe agreed, "but someone is also maneuvering behind her, with precision, with design." He tapped his fingertips together. "Blackmail." "That ledger wasn't about money," I said. "It was leverage." "Precisely." The room stretched quiet around us. I jotted notes, distilled the timeline, and typed up a clean sheet for the casebook. Wolfe watched me with something like approval, disguised, as usual, beneath a grunt. When I handed him the page, he read it once and said, "The assassin is accelerating." I nodded. "And we're running out of time." "No," Wolfe said, rising slowly, but with a surprising finality. "He is running out of time." I waited. Wolfe's voice dropped to that deep, resonant pitch that usually means the walls themselves should listen. "Archie," he said, "we must corner him before the velocity proves fatal to us all." That was the hook, sharp as a knife, ending the beat. The first sign something unnatural was happening came around 8:30 that evening, when Inspector Cramer returned to the brownstone without pounding on the door, growling at me, or demanding to see Wolfe as if he were about to issue a subpoena. He simply rang the bell once, politely. That was as alarming as a bloodstain on Wolfe's favourite orchid pot. I opened the door, ready with a wisecrack, but the look on Cramer's face shut it down fast. His jaw was tight, his hat soaked from the rain, and his eyes had the kind of tired fury that comes from being betrayed by someone you trusted. He stepped inside with barely a word, brushing past me and heading for the office like a man walking toward a confession booth. When Cramer sits in Wolfe's office without barking, you know civilization is ending. Wolfe was in his chair, hands folded across the equator of his waistline, looking like an offended emperor. Cramer didn't sit immediately. He hovered, before dropping heavily into the red leather seat. He didn't remove his hat or his cigar. That alone made Wolfe's left eyebrow twitch. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "your expression suggests unpleasant developments." Cramer dragged a hand down his face. "Someone in my squad tampered with evidence." I blinked. "You mean besides the flock of political tourists at Keating's penthouse?" Cramer shot me a look. "This wasn't civilians. This was one of my own. Someone altered a lab report, and the watch that was missing from the corpse, it wasn't missing. It was never stolen. It was placed later." Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a small, dangerous sound. "To shift the time of death." "Exactly," Cramer nodded. "If the death time shifts, so does half the suspect pool. Someone's steering this case, and they're using my department to do it." Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment. It wasn't exhaustion. It was concentration, the kind he applied only to orchids, philosophy, or murder. "You withheld this from Archie earlier." "I needed confirmation first," Cramer said, voice tight. "You have it now." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Then you must give me the complete roster of officers who touched the evidence." Cramer stiffened. "Wolfe?" "Inspector," Wolfe said sharply, "you came to me. I cannot proceed blindfolded." Cramer hesitated, fingers twitching near his coat pocket. Finally, with a half snarl, he pulled out a folded sheet and slapped it onto the desk. "If you leak this," he muttered, "I'll eat that globe on your desk, stand included." I stepped forward and picked up the sheet. 9 names, some familiar, some not. "You want me to cross-reference political donors with police salaries?" I asked Wolfe. "I could do it with darts, much faster." Wolfe glared. "Archie, cease your jackanapery. Use your brain, not your barbarism." "My barbarism gets results," I muttered. "Your barbarism gets bandages," Wolfe retorted. Cramer rubbed his forehead. "Goodwin, don't antagonize him. I need his mind functioning at peak capacity." Wolfe gave Cramer a sidelong look that carried just enough grudging respect to fill a teacup. "Thank you, Inspector," he said. "Archie merely enjoys his puerile needling." "It keeps me young," I said. "And you irritable." "Precisely," Wolfe grumbled. I carried the roster to my desk and pulled the case files toward me. Wolfe leaned back, watching with narrowed eyes. "Begin with the names most likely to benefit from delay," he instructed, "or distraction." I skimmed the list. One name jumped off immediately. Lieutenant Harold Grissom, recently transferred, good record, no disciplinary marks. But, according to a note from a patrolman, seen entering Veronica Dale's building 2 nights before the murder. I read it aloud. Cramer's head jerked up. "He wasn't assigned there." "Appears nowhere in logs," I added. "Which means he didn't want anyone to know." Cramer's cigar finally left his fingers long enough for him to swear into the air. "If Grissom's dirty, Wolfe cut in. "He may be a red herring. Do not leap to conclusions." Wolfe's tone held that rare edge, the one he uses when he's being protective of Archie by extension. I wasn't sure what leaps Cramer was planning to make, but Wolfe's voice grounded him. "We will speak to him." Stebbins arrived 10 minutes later, dripping water and resentment. "You wanted Grissom?" he grunted. "We got him." Grissom entered under Stebbins' escort, a lean man, nervous eyes, uniform sharp enough to slice bread. "Lieutenant," Wolfe said, steepling his fingers, "you recently visited Miss Veronica Dale's building." Grissom blinked rapidly. "Yes, sir. My cousin lives there. I was dropping off medicine." "Late at night?" I asked. "After 10? "She works nights," he said. "She wasn't feeling well. I can give you her number." Cramer questioned him for several minutes, but the story held. The cousin confirmed it over the phone, annoyed but coherent. His log absence was explained by his shift swapping earlier that day. He had no connection to Keating, Barrington, or the ledger. Wolfe finally waved him out. When the door closed, Stebbins snorted. "Told you he was clean." "It remains to be proven," Wolfe said, "but he is not our culprit." Cramer slumped. "So we're back to nothing." "Not nothing," Wolfe countered. "Someone in your department altered evidence. Someone with access. Someone with purpose." Wolfe tapped the roster. "We will pursue them one by one." I leaned back. "And Veronica Dale?" Wolfe opened his eyes fully. Never a good sign. "Bring Miss Dale back," he said. "The killer circles us. I must corner her." The way he said corner sent a little shiver down my spine. For Wolfe, the hunt had officially begun, and that was the hook, sharp as a thorn on one of his orchids, ending the scene and beginning the next. The moment Veronica Dale walked back into Wolfe's office, I could tell the shine was wearing thin. Last time she'd arrived wrapped in glamour like a department store window. This time the packaging was dented. She sat, crossed her legs, and tried to reclaim the aura of a woman who could make half of Manhattan's upper crust grovel with a glance. It didn't land. She looked like a Broadway marquee with half the bulbs dead. Wolfe watched her the way a botanist watches an orchid that's thinking about dropping petals. "Miss Dale," he said, "you have returned. Good." "I didn't have a choice," she said, voice tight. "Your message said it was urgent." "It is." He folded his hands. "Someone has died." Her breath hitched. "Barrington?" "Yes." She shut her eyes. "Dear God." "No deity, Miss Dale, merely murder." I took my station by my desk, notebook ready. "And the best way to keep the count from rising," I added, "is for you to stop tap dancing around the truth." Veronica's jaw tightened. "I've told you everything." "No," Wolfe said softly. "You have not." Silence. I counted 6 seconds before Wolfe leaned forward. "Miss Dale, you were not merely present at Keating's dinner. You were involved in a transaction." Her lashes flickered. "I don't know what—" "Please," Wolfe interrupted, sharper now. "Keating was blackmailing someone, perhaps multiple someones, and the amount, $200,000, was routed through an intermediary, a scandal with potential political consequences." Her hands trembled. I saw it even through the gloves. At last she whispered, "It was hush money." Wolfe nodded. "For you." "And Barrington," she added, voice cracking. "Keating had information, personal information about both of us. I couldn't let it come out. I have a public image, and Barrington had a family." "Interesting pairing," I said. "The starlet and the skyscraper mogul." She shot me a glare sharp enough to shave ice. "It wasn't an affair." "Never suggested it was," I said. Your tone is doing all the suggesting. Wolfe cut us off. Why did Keating hold leverage over you? She looked away. 5 years ago, I attended a private political retreat. Someone there made a very foolish comment about a judge. Keating overheard. He recorded it. I wasn't the speaker, but I was present. If it leaked, it would make me look complicit. Barrington had his own skeletons from that same weekend. And the $200,000? Wolfe asked. Shared payment, she whispered. He insisted we split it. I noted everything. You should have mentioned this earlier. I was afraid, she said. Keating was dangerous. Barrington was ruthless. And now they're both dead. Wolfe's eyes chilled. Fear is understandable. Concealment is not. She swallowed. Then her face changed, softened, collapsed, like she was finally letting herself admit something. I didn't kill them, either of them. Wolfe didn't accept or reject that. He simply said, You also know something about the watch. Her eyes snapped toward him. What? Keating's watch, Wolfe said. It was later found on the body, engraved. The muscles in her neck went rigid. Yes, I had it engraved for him, a gift, but it was on his wrist when I left, I swear. Someone removed it and put it back later. To distort the timeline, I said. She nodded miserably. Before Wolfe could continue, the bell rang. Fritz appeared a moment later. Inspector Cramer, sir. Cramer entered with the weariness of a man who's been wrestling the press corps with a broken broom. He looked at Veronica, then at Wolfe. So, she's talking. Talking, Wolfe confirmed, and now in need of verification. Cramer's gaze softened a hair. Not sympathy, just professional assessment. Dale, your story checks out. At least the part about the blackmail. We found a sealed memo in Keating's safe. Name's redacted, but the dollar amount matches. Her relief was brief. So I'm in the clear. Cramer shook his head. Lady, nobody's in the clear. Wolfe cleared his throat. Inspector, the intermediary line item in the ledger was coded. Miss Dale has not yet explained the notation. Cramer turned to Veronica. Yes, the lettering, VD, we assumed it was yours. She shook her head violently. It wasn't. That wasn't how Keating kept track of me. I stepped closer. Then who? She hesitated. The kind of hesitation that holds dynamite. Finally she whispered, My brother. Cramer straightened. Your what? Raymond Dale, she said. He's with the NYPD. Of all the ways that sentence could have landed, it chose the one that made the room pivot sideways. Your brother is a cop, I repeated, and Keating coded the ledger under his initials. Yes, she said, because Raymond was the one who delivered the payment. Cramer swore under his breath. Does Internal Affairs know? No, she said. He wasn't involved in the scandal. He was just the delivery mechanism. He hated it. Hated me getting mixed up in politics. It drove a wedge between us. We haven't spoken in months. Wolfe closed his eyes thoughtfully. So your alibi depends on Raymond Dale, she nodded. Yes. And, I said, he's refusing to back it up. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Wolfe's lids opened, slow and deliberate. Archie. Yes, sir? You must locate Raymond Dale. Cramer rubbed his temple. Goodwin, be careful. If this guy's scared, he might be reckless. Wolfe's voice deepened. Precisely. A frightened man with a badge is dangerous. And that was the end of the beat. A clean, sharp hook, sharpened by dread. You haven't lived until you've chased a frightened NYPD officer into a waterfront tenement at 9 at night, in a part of Manhattan where the street lamps flicker like they're nervous too. The docks were breathing fog across the pavement, the kind that might have been born in a gin joint and raised on bad decisions. I parked the Heron coupe under a sputtering light, not to protect it. Nothing short of divine intervention could protect a car here, but to keep myself visible if anyone decided to put holes in me. Raymond Dale's building was the kind of structure that leaned a little, like it had spent too long hearing confessions and regretted everyone. Inside, the stairwell smelled like old newspapers and older regrets. The elevator sat in the corner, shuddering as if haunted, so I gave it a wide berth. If you're gonna shoot me, I muttered to the empty hall, at least let me take the stairs. Elevators in these places are death traps even without the gun. The third floor was dim, the bulbs buzzing like trapped insects. I found apartment 3F, knocked twice and said, Raymond Dale, open up or shoot through the door. Either way, let's pick one. The lock clicked. A chain rattled. Then the door opened just enough for a scared pair of eyes to evaluate me like a bad ingredient in a stew. "Goodwin?" he whispered. "That's right," I said. "If you don't let me in, I'll start singing, loudly. The neighbors will kill us both." He let me in. The apartment was small, sparse, and claustrophobic. A cot, a table, a single lamp, and a service revolver that he wasn't subtle about holding. His face had the worn look of a man who hadn't slept in 2 days, and the jitter in his hand said the gun was more for courage than combat. "I didn't kill Keating," he blurted. "That's great," I said. "But I came for the truth, not the disclaimers." He paced, gun dangling at his side. "I stole the ledger page," he admitted. "I took it from the penthouse the night of the fundraiser. I knew if the scandal broke, Veronica would be dragged through it. The press would eat her alive. I couldn't let that happen." "Nice brotherly devotion," I said. "But you don't break crime scenes to show you care." He raked a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. Melton was there." "Melton who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Captain Ira Melton," I whistled low. "Political powerhouse Melton, the man who considers evidence optional and favors mandatory. That Melton." Raymond nodded hard. "I saw him leaving the penthouse early before the body was found. He shouldn't have been there." "That's a hell of an accusation," I said. "It's the truth," he insisted. "Melton met Keating the night before. They argued. Something big, something ugly." If guilt were a liquid, Raymond Dale was sloshing in it. But guilt isn't proof, and panic is a lousy compass. "So, what's your plan?" I asked. "Hide here till Judgment Day. Hope the killer gets tired and retires." "I don't know," he snapped. "I'm not thinking straight." "No," I said, "you're not. But I am, occasionally. Drop the gun." He hesitated. "Raymond," I said quietly, "if I wanted you arrested, I wouldn't have knocked." After a long beat, he lowered the gun. I took it, popped the cylinder, and emptied it onto the table. "There. Now we can talk like civilized men who don't fire bullets indoors." He sank onto the cot. "Keating had something on Melton, something worse than anything he had on us. That's why I took the page. But I swear, Goodwin, I didn't kill Keating, and I didn't kill Barrington." I studied him. He looked desperate enough to tell the truth, or desperate enough to invent a new one. "Fine," I said. "Let's go." "Go?" He recoiled. "Where?" "Brownstone. Wolfe wants to question you." His eyes widened. "Wolfe? The Wolfe?" "Only one of him," I said. "And he's in a mood. So if you value your hide, don't try anything theatrical." I got him downstairs and into the coupe without incident. As I was sliding behind the wheel, I told him, "By the way, I'll need something of Melton's." Raymond frowned. "Like what?" "A glass he's handled. Coffee cup, whiskey tumbler, anything." "I don't—" "Raymond," I said, "you want Wolfe to clear you. He needs fingerprints." Raymond groaned. "Fine. Melton drinks at O'Hara's on 48th. Good, we'll stop." O'Hara's was smoky, dim, and filled with off-duty uniforms drowning their shift in amber comfort. Melton wasn't there, but his glass was. Apparently he'd left minutes earlier after nursing a shot of rye. The bartender recognized the description, shrugged, and handed me the glass without ceremony. "Better not tell him I gave you that," the bartender muttered. "I'll keep your charitable instincts anonymous," I said. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was planted in his chair like a monarch who disapproved of the entire concept of nighttime. He looked up at Raymond Dale with cool appraisal. "Sit," he commanded. Raymond sat like a man lowering himself onto a bed of nails. I handed Wolfe the whiskey glass, wrapped neatly in a handkerchief. "Melton's," I said. Wolfe nodded once, then took the ledger scrap from his desk blotter. "The partial print on this has been irritating me. Archie, clear the table." I did. Wolfe examined the glass under a magnifying lens, then compared it piece by piece with the smudge on the ledger fragment. His silence meant concentration, not defeat. Finally, he exhaled. "No." "No what?" I asked. "These prints do not match," Wolfe said flatly. "They resemble each other only superficially." Cramer, who had arrived during my reporting and now leaned in the doorway, frowned. "So Melton didn't touch the ledger?" "Correct," Wolfe said. "Someone placed his prints on it." "That's insane," Cramer muttered. "No," Wolfe replied. "It is strategy." I blinked. "You're saying someone tried to frame Melton?" "Yes," Wolfe said. But they were careless. The ridge depth is different. The fragment's print is smaller. A different hand entirely. Raymond looked up sharply. Then who? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That, he said, voice dropping to a dangerous calm. We shall soon learn. And that was the hook, dark and sharp, the killer's shadow lengthening in the brownstone. If Wolfe ever enjoyed the sensation of tightening a noose, he hid it well. But that evening, as he sat in the office with the ledger fragment, Melton's glass, Veronica's trembling statement, and Raymond Dale slumped like a man awaiting his fate, I saw something rare flicker in Wolfe's eyes. Not triumph exactly, but recognition. The pieces had found their arrangement, and he knew it. The room had the stillness of a held breath. He finally spoke. Archie. Present, I said. You will type. That sentence usually means someone's life is about to get very unpleasant, and Wolfe had no intention of being the one to sugarcoat it. I went to my desk, cracking my knuckles in the universal language of secretarial defiance. Wolfe began, We have been manipulated. Cramer, who stood near the globe like a man deciding whether to spin it or throw it, lifted a brow. By who? By the killer, Wolfe replied, and masterfully. Raymond Dale exhaled shakily. Veronica Dale, pale and silent on the couch, twisted her gloves until I feared for their stitching. Wolfe continued, voice low and deliberate. The evidence was altered. The page was stolen. The watch was repositioned. The gift engravings were used as misdirection. The donor codes were falsified. Even orchid pollen was employed to implicate me. His nostrils flared. An insult and a clumsy one. Cramer frowned. You're telling me this was all one person, one mastermind? Yes, Wolfe said. Not Barrington, not Melton, not Miss Dale, and certainly not your officers. He tapped the ledger scrap. The culprit was the only person with access to all of it. Schedules, ledgers, accounts, gifts, messages, and personal effects. My fingers hovered over the typewriter keys. You mean someone internal to Keating's circle? Correct. Cramer crossed his arms. Who? Spell it out. Wolfe inhaled deeply, preparing for the strike. Linda Shaw. The name dropped like a sandbag from a skyscraper. Cramer's jaw tightened. Keating's assistant? That mousy little? Mousy mice do not orchestrate such crimes, Wolfe said, but assistants often do. They are invisible, trusted, overlooked. Raymond Dale blinked. I barely remember her. And that, Wolfe said, is why she succeeded. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Let us review, I typed. Miss Shaw had access to Keating's private ledger, including the page concerning the $200,000. She removed it, not to protect Miss Dale nor Barrington, but to shield herself. Veronica's head snapped up. Why her? Because, Wolfe said, you were wrong about the political retreat. Keating had leverage not only on you and Barrington, but on someone else present that weekend. Linda Shaw was there as well, though not in an official capacity. Veronica froze. I didn't know. No one was meant to, Wolfe said. He continued. She planted the watch to shift the time of death. She doctored the stomach tablets in Barrington's possession when he began to panic. She wore a lipstick shade identical to the smear at the phone. The mismatched cufflinks? One of hers. A scuffle occurred, minor but telling, when Keating tried to stop her. Cramer's cigar twitched. Then where did the orchid clue come from? Wolfe's lip curled. She purchased rare orchids for Keating weekly as gifts for his donors. The residue lingered on her coat. When she rifled the files 2 nights before the murder, she brushed against the blotter and left pollen behind. She attempted to use this against me later, believing the police would know my association with orchids. I paused typing. And Melton's fingerprints? Wolfe sniffed. Lifted from a glass some time ago and planted crudely. The ridge width was wrong, size wrong, pattern consistent but mismatched. Miss Shaw sought to distract us with an officer of influence, a red herring. Cramer paced once, absorbing it. Then, she fooled my whole department. No, Wolfe said. Your department was hurried and overwhelmed, and she planned accordingly. Raymond looked up, hollow. So Melton's innocent? Yes, Wolfe replied, though seldom angelic. I resumed typing. Wolfe's voice deepened. The motive is simple. Keating intended to expose the blackmail ring not for justice but to reposition himself with political rivals. Miss Shaw learned she was included in the scandal's collateral damage. She could not permit it, thus the killings. Veronica whispered, but she seemed so mild. People often do, Wolfe said, until cornered. Cramer planted both hands on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe, if you're wrong, I'll bury you under paperwork so deep you'll need a mining crew. For you, Inspector, Wolfe replied calmly, that is practically affectionate. I nearly applauded. Cramer grunted, which was as close as we got to a compliment. Wolfe then raised a hand. Archie? Yes. Prepare the office. His eyes gleamed with the finality of a judge reaching for the gavel. Bring them all here. All? I echoed. All, Wolfe repeated. Miss Shaw, Miss Dale, Mr. Melton, Lieutenant Grissom, Mr. Pearly Stebbins, and Inspector Cramer you may consider already present. The denouement requires an audience. Cramer's brows shot up. You're holding one of your blasted parlour theatrics. It is not theatrics, Wolfe said stiffly. It is clarity. I gathered my notebook, checked the phone directory, and reached for my coat. Shall I start alphabetically or by probable guilt? Wolfe glared. Archie, if you persist with this imbecility— I'll take that as alphabetical, I said. Veronica rose unsteadily. If Linda did this, what happens to her? Cramer answered, voice low. She answers for 2 murders, and attempted framing, and obstruction, and about a dozen more things my lawyers can list. Raymond swallowed hard, his shame thick in the room. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, not from weariness, but to solidify the final structure of the case. When he opened them, they gleamed with cold precision. Archie, he said. Yeah? Move quickly. The killer is most dangerous when the noose begins to tighten. And that was the hook. Sharp, taut, inevitable. If you've never seen the brownstone packed wall to wall with suspects, cops, an agitated starlet, and one extremely smug genius in a yellow shirt, you've missed one of Manhattan's least advertised attractions. That night, Wolfe's office felt less like a room and more like a pressure cooker. Veronica Dale sat rigid on the couch, Raymond beside her, trying not to unravel. Captain Melton stood near the bookcase, pretending not to sweat. Stebbins lurked like a bouncer who'd been told he couldn't throw anyone out. And Linda Shaw, small, neat, calm in that eerie way only guilty people manage, sat at the far end of the row, legs crossed, fingers folded like she was waiting for a train. Cramer leaned against the bar globe, arms folded, cigar unlit, expression carved from granite. He didn't bark, he didn't grumble, he didn't even sigh. For Inspector Cramer, that was the emotional equivalent of a full Greek tragedy. Wolfe, occupying his throne behind the desk, lifted a hand. Silence fell instantly. Ladies and gentlemen, Wolfe said, we shall begin. I took my spot at the typewriter, though Wolfe didn't need notes for this performance. He could have delivered it blindfolded, underwater, and still out-argued the Bar Association. He gestured toward Linda Shaw. The murderer sits among you. That got a few sharp breaths, and one poorly muffled curse. Wolfe's eyes never left Shaw. Your plan was elegant until it fractured. You relied on invisibility, the prerogative of an assistant. You touched every document, every account, every message. You arranged meetings, accepted deliveries, screened calls. You knew which donors feared exposure. You knew which officers could be manipulated. You knew Keating's weaknesses, his panic, his paranoia. Shaw remained perfectly still, which was all the confirmation Wolfe needed. He continued, Keating discovered your embezzlement. A portion of his donation pipeline had begun to vanish. You feared exposure and prison. His blackmail of Miss Dale and Mr. Barrington created your opportunity. 2 panicked victims would make useful misdirection. Veronica flinched. Melton shifted. Raymond swallowed hard. Wolfe pressed on. You stole the ledger page to obscure the financial trail. You placed the engraved watch on Keating's wrist hours later to distort the time of death. You doctored Mr. Barrington's tablets when he began to suspect you would ruin him as surely as Keating. You applied lipstick smudges at the phone from your own case. You swapped cufflinks during your struggle with Keating. Cramer's head jerked. Struggle? Wolfe nodded. Oh yes, Inspector. Keating resisted. Briefly, just long enough to scratch her wrist, which she is concealing under her sleeve even now. Shaw's fingers twitched. The slightest movement, but Wolfe caught it. Furthermore, Wolfe said, You left orchid pollen on the blotter when you rifled the penthouse files 2 nights prior. You assumed this would direct suspicion toward me. Your miscalculation lay in underestimating the specificity of the cultivar. I couldn't resist. Next time, Miss Shaw, buy cheaper orchids. Wolfe gave me a mild glare, which for him qualified as paternal indulgence. He shifted to the wider room. Miss Shaw coveted control of Keating's entire operation. He handled money, influence, and secrets. She handled him. When he grew fearful and erratic, she realized he might expose her. His attempt to blackmail Miss Dale and Mr. Barrington was not merely an opportunity, it was a threat. She removed him, then removed Barrington when he became inconvenient, and she attempted to cast suspicion upon Captain Melton, whose political connections made him an ideal scapegoat. Melton let out a shaken exhale. She used me? You are eminently usable, Wolfe said dryly. But innocent. Shaw finally spoke, her voice controlled. You have no proof. Cramer straightened. We've got enough to tear your life apart. Wolfe raised a finger. Inspector, allow me. He leaned forward, voice dropping into that deep, resonant register that makes grown men reconsider their life choices. Miss Shaw, you purchased the orchids, you handled the ledger, you placed the watch, you delivered the tablets, you framed an officer with political rank, you tried to mislead me, and, most damning, you underestimated the intelligence of everyone in this room. Her jaw set. I didn't kill anyone. Cramer's voice, when it came, was quiet, bleak as a church bell. Miss Shaw, you played us all. She rose, fast, but Stebbins was faster. He pinned her arms without ceremony. She didn't scream, didn't thrash. She simply deflated, like someone whose last plan had been ripped to shreds. Wolfe's voice was cold enough to frost the windows. Intellect without scruple is ruinous. No one spoke. Not Veronica, who sat trembling. Not Melton, who looked like a man who dodged a firing squad. Not Raymond, whose guilt was melting into exhausted relief. Not Cramer, whose silence was louder than any explosion he'd ever delivered. I typed because my fingers needed something to do besides tremble. Cramer finally drew a breath. Wolfe, if you're wrong, I swear I'll bury you under paperwork until you drown. For you, Inspector, Wolfe murmured. I should endure it gladly. It was the closest they'd ever come to a handshake. Cramer nodded to Stebbins. Take her. Shaw didn't speak as they escorted her out. She just kept her eyes forward, not defiant, not broken, simply finished. When the door closed, the silence stayed. Heavy, settling. Wolfe lifted his hand. Archie, sit down. You fidget. I sat, mostly because my knees were debating the matter anyway. Veronica whispered, It's over? For now, I said. With luck, you'll only be on the front page for a week. Cramer headed for the door, coat over his arm. He paused, looked back at Wolfe, and said, in the tone of a man swallowing a lemon whole, Thanks, Wolfe. Not that I'll ever admit it. Wolfe inclined his head. Indeed. And just like that, the brownstone exhaled, armchairs easing back into place, the air warming, the tension dissolving into the wallpaper. Another night, another corpse or two, another dance around power and secrecy. As I typed the final report, I wrote the line Wolfe would never say aloud, and that was the night Inspector Cramer lost his temper, not in anger, but in disappointment.